Throwing kerosene on every fire. The Democratic mayor of Miami Beach there describing Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis' latest move, targeting 2 congressional seats held by black lawmakers. NBC News national political reporter Marc Caputo is here. So, Marc, you're writing that DeSantis is undoing what's known as a minority access congressional seat in North Florida. Could you tell us more about what's going on there?
Right. It's redistricting is really complicated, so I don't want to bore people. But essentially, there's 2 kinds of minority seats. There's a minority majority or a majority minority seat where most of the voters are, say, black or Hispanic. Then there's something called a minority access seat. And that's where minorities are in a large enough concentration where they have a reasonable ability to elect a candidate of their choice, in this case, a fellow African-American or a Latino lawmaker. Because of the way the Voting Rights Act is drafted and recent Supreme Court rulings, there's a possibility those types of seats, if they are drawn solely to boost minority representation in Congress, might not be legal. And so Ron DeSantis has highlighted that for 1 seat in specific. Yes, there's 2 seats in question here, but it's really 1 seat. It's held by Congressman Al Lawson. It runs from Tallahassee to Jacksonville. And because it's so long and so sprawling, and if you look at a 2017 Supreme Court ruling, there's a possibility it might be declared unconstitutional. So DeSantis told lawmakers, hey, look, get rid of this minority access seat, get rid of these minority access seats. And they didn't really do it because they weren't sure that he was right. And even though Ron DeSantis is a very popular conservative governor and he got everything he wanted in the session except for this one thing, he's promised a veto of this legislation, these maps, and he's probably going to kick it to the courts. And understand the Florida Supreme Court is sort of majority conservative, as is the U.S. Supreme Court, where one of his close friends is U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And it's there where DeSantis might be able to strike down not only this seat here in Florida, but also kind of deal a blow to minority access seats in general if they are considered, quote, racially gerrymandered.
So you would think that he would be on the same page as his legislature because it's GOP-led, but could you just describe for our viewers how this is putting him actually at odds with his legislature?
Well, you just don't see this usually.
Yeah.
Usually redistricting is just held by legislatures. Now, if there's a Democratic legislature and a Republican governor, or a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, yeah, you can sometimes see veto threats in congressional maps. In fact, that actually happened in Louisiana. There's a Democratic governor, John Bel Edwards, and there's a Republican legislature, and so he vetoed their congressional maps. Here you have a Republican legislature in Florida and a Republican governor, and they're essentially ideologically aligned. They're very conservative, and they've given him everything he could have wanted and more. Abortion restrictions on teachers teaching about gender, sexual identity, sexual orientation, things of that nature. And, they gave him an election fraud police force, even though there was no election fraud here.
Right.
Yet there's this one thing that he really wanted, get rid of this minority access seat, and they didn't. And quote someone who's spoken to him and is familiar with the governor's thinking, look, you can agree with him 99% of the time on 99 of the items. He's not going to remember those. He's going to remember the one time that you didn't go with him, that he thinks in terms of absolutes. It reminds me of the old saying that if you're with him 99% of the time, you're a damn traitor. And so that's kind of what we're looking at here.
So look, you say this is unusual. A University of Florida poli-sci professor told you Florida's never seen a governor get involved in congressional redistricting like this. What else did Professor McDonald tell you about what DeSantis is doing?
Well, he thinks that there's really 2 things going on. One, DeSantis is looking at running for president. And if he does, he's going to be able to say, look, I fought the good fight to get more Republican seats here. That's one. Secondly, if he happens to prevail in the courts and they get parts of the Voting Rights Act struck down, or something called the Fair Districts Amendments, which were kind of an anti-partisan gerrymandering law that voters passed in 2010, that'll be another feather in his cap. So McDonald said, look, this is a win-win. What's really rare about DeSantis getting involved here is not only did he issue a veto threat, not only is he probably going to follow through with that once he gets the maps to veto them, but he drew his own maps. That just usually doesn't happen. This is a function, usually the purview of state legislatures throughout the country. Yes, governors sign them or they veto them. They veto them very rarely. They almost never veto them. No one can really remember when it's happened if the maps are drawn by their own party. But here we are in Florida. DeSantis has had a tendency for blazing his own trail and igniting things along the way. As you quoted Dan Gelber from my story, that he brings kerosene to every fire. So that could be one of the instances here.
Marc, I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, as you mentioned, he's up for re-election, DeSantis, that is, in November. He's eyeing a presidential run in 2024. Voters and people don't necessarily love a court fight, right? They don't necessarily get excited about contentious battles. So how is this? Is it just the attention a good thing? I mean, you might say on the flip side, well, people might say, this isn't good. He's just causing too many problems. Literally, that quote, throwing kerosene on every fire.
Well, that's possible. I mean, understand that first and foremost, that Ron DeSantis governs, comports himself, conducts himself as a modern day Trump Republican. Mm-hmm. And one of the central features that you see among Republican voters is they want someone who fights. And Ron DeSantis could get in a fight in an empty room at this point. I mean, there's very few fights he doesn't engage in. For instance, a few weeks ago, I can't even remember, I keep track of the days, maybe it was about a week ago, he went to an event, one of his own events, and there were some high school students standing behind him with masks on. Yeah. He kind of berated them for wearing masks. And this sparked a cycle that you see with DeSantis. Mm-hmm. Liberals were outraged. And Republicans, they love the fact that he berated the kids, and then they love the fact that the liberals were outraged, and that generated media coverage, and then he began fundraising off of it. Right now, DeSantis is in a position where his pugilistic mood or modus operandi has met the moment, and it's what his voters want. Is what voters are going to want in November or in 2024. We're going to have to wait and see. But so far, it's working for him. It's certainly working for him financially when it comes to campaign finance reporting, and it's working him in the polls. I mean, the polls show that he's generally leading his likely Democratic rivals, the two of them, main two of them, Charlie Crist and Agriculture Commissioner Nikki Fried in the state. So things are looking pretty good for him, and this is one of the reasons why. So yeah, the voters like the fight, or his voters do. Yeah, if it's working in the polls and it's working in fundraising, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I suppose. Marc, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.